I have collected 165 amazing historical photos that we missed together with you. Write your opinion in the comments. I will be glad to read it. In 1969, Roman Polanski returned to the home where the Manson killers murdered his pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, and wrote "Pig" on the door in her blood. The lower photo shows Tate posing at that same doorway months before her death. A Confederate veteran eats with his family at a Texas reunion on July 1, 1942, almost 80 years after the Civil War ended. Veterans photographed there were roughly the same age as surviving Second World War veterans are today, and Texas held its final Confederate reunion just 2 years later. My father, a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne Division, photographed the ruins of Hitler's mountain retreat near Berchtesgaden in May 1945. Allied bombers had devastated the Obersalzberg complex days before American troops arrived and found its tunnels filled with weapons, documents, and looted treasures. Iranian women celebrate the Shah's departure in January 1979, unaware that their freedoms would soon shrink. Weeks later, Khomeini demanded Islamic dress in government offices, sparking huge protests, while nationwide compulsory hijab laws followed in 1983. In 1935, Olympic legend Jesse Owens worked as a petrol station attendant to help pay for his studies at Ohio State University. 1 year later, he won 4 gold medals in Nazi Germany, crushing Hitler's racist claims before the world. On April 18, 1988, Iranian frigate Sahand burned from bow to stern after United States aircraft struck it during Operation Praying Mantis. The attack ignited its ammunition, causing massive explosions that sank the warship. From 1904 to 1908, German colonial forces killed at least 40,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama people in present-day Namibia. Survivors were imprisoned in concentration camps, where forced labor, starvation, disease, and brutal treatment killed thousands more. This teenage soldier from the 4th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment Der Führer was captured by the United States 3rd Armored Division near St. Vith on December 23, 1944. His torn trousers and improvised head wrap reveal the brutal cold and chaos of the Battle of the Bulge. Petty Officer 3rd Class Philip Turney stands aboard the shattered USS Liberty after Israeli warplanes and torpedo boats attacked it on June 8, 1967. The assault killed 34 Americans, wounded 171, and left the ship scarred by rockets, cannon fire, and a torpedo strike. In 1973, Marlon Brando refused his Oscar for The Godfather and sent Sacheen Littlefeather to protest Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. She was given only 60 seconds to speak, while the audience responded with both boos and applause. On August 10, 1961, the United States began testing chemical defoliants over South Vietnam to strip away enemy food and forest cover. Operation Ranch Hand later sprayed about 20 million gallons, exposing millions of people to toxic chemicals whose deadly effects continued for generations. In 1977, 12-year-old Zach Starkey received a drum kit and a private lesson from legendary Who drummer Keith Moon for his birthday. Zach later became the drummer for The Who, taking the same seat once held by his childhood mentor. Charles de Gaulle returned from political retirement during the Algerian crisis and founded France's Fifth Republic in 1958. He then won the presidency with 78.5% of the electoral vote, gaining extraordinary power to reshape the nation. A Red Army sergeant, an American corporal, and a British soldier celebrate Japan's surrender in Berlin on August 22, 1945. Their shared victory came just weeks before the alliance began to fracture into the Cold War. In 1939, women marched through Damascus against Turkey's annexation of the Syrian region of Alexandretta. Their signs declared, "Our blood is sacrificed for the Syrian Arab Sanjak," and "Long live France," even though France had approved its transfer to Turkey. In April 1940, American students were urged to study politics and train for democracy as war spread across Europe. The chalkboard asks a sharp question: Could they vote intelligently when the future of democracy might depend on their choices? Astronaut Charles Bolden pilots Space Shuttle Columbia before re-entry on January 17, 1986. Just 11 days later, Challenger was destroyed, while Bolden went on to become the first black permanent administrator of NASA. A Leibstandarte Courier on a DKW NZ 350 motorcycle asks a local woman for directions in ruined Lisieux, France, in 1940. The signs point toward Caen, Falaise, and Cabourg as German forces push through Normandy. In 1961, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai posed with members of the former Qing imperial family. Among them was Pu Yi, China's last emperor, who had become an ordinary citizen after years in a prison re-education center. An interracial couple shares a kiss inside a Pittsburgh nightclub around 1950, when such affection could provoke hostility across much of America. A smiling friend watches from the booth, turning this rare photograph into a bold record of ordinary love during segregation. A carrier pigeon is released through a tank's porthole during the Battle of Amiens on August 9, 1918. These birds carried urgent messages when radios failed and telephone lines were destroyed, sometimes making them the only link between advancing troops and commanders. Born into slavery in North Carolina in 1851, conjoined twins Millie and Christine McCoy survived kidnapping and years of exploitation before taking control of their own performances. They became wealthy international stars and used their money to support their family, a black school, and a church. In 1922, 18-year-old inventor H. Day wore headphones connected to a homemade wireless receiver hidden inside his top hat. This early portable radio let him hear broadcasts in public decades before pocket radios became common. In 1936, exiled Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie condemned Italy's chemical attacks before the League of Nations, while Italian journalists mocked him from the gallery. He warned that if Ethiopia was abandoned, every nation could become the next victim. In 1908, Christabel Pankhurst addressed a huge crowd in Trafalgar Square, demanding voting rights for women. The sign behind her invited women to march on Parliament on October 13th, an event that ended in clashes with police and dozens of arrests. A French soldier warms his frozen hands during the brutal winter campaign in Italy in 1944. Many troops suffered frostbite as they fought through deep snow and mountain cold with limited winter gear. In 1938, Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich and declared peace for our time after accepting Hitler's seizure of the Sudetenland. Less than 1 year later, Germany invaded Poland, and Britain entered the deadliest war in history. During the 2001 Quebec City protests, a Canadian demonstrator used a hockey stick to shoot a tear gas canister back at riot police. The unusual weapon became a powerful symbol of the clash over a proposed free trade agreement across the Americas. In 1943, Soviet civilians gathered around an unexploded German SC-1000 bomb weighing about 1,000 kilograms. Its massive steel casing could survive deep impact before detonating, making removal extremely dangerous. Richard Feynman was photographed at secret Los Alamos in 1944 while helping build the atomic bomb. During his spare time, he cracked locked safes and left notes inside to expose shocking security flaws. In 1951, Chinese combat engineers worked through the night to repair this bombed railway bridge with wooden beams. Their emergency work restored a vital supply route using little more than timber, ropes, and hand tools. This is Tokyo in 1945, after American firebombing turned entire neighborhoods into ash. The deadliest raid on March 9th and 10th killed about 100,000 people in a single night. In 1939, workers dug Rome's first subway tunnels directly beside the Colosseum. The line was built for the 1942 World's Fair, but the war canceled the event and delayed the subway's opening until 1955. Francesco Lentini was born with a parasitic twin, giving him 3 full legs, one underdeveloped foot, 2 sets of genitals, and 16 toes. He became a famous circus performer, married, fathered several children, and built a small fortune. Mary Ann MacLeod arrived in New York from Scotland in 1930 with only $50 and later worked as a domestic servant. She married wealthy builder Fred Trump, and in 1946 gave birth to Donald Trump, the future President of the United States. The Andrea Gale left Gloucester on September 20, 1991, to hunt swordfish near the Grand Banks. Weeks later, 3 storms collided, creating 30-meter waves and winds of 150 kilometers per hour, and the boat vanished with all 6 crew members. Jane Mansfield and a young Dennis Hopper posed together in the mid-1950s, just before both became major Hollywood names. Hopper soon appeared in Rebel Without a Cause and Giant, while Mansfield became a global sex symbol in The Girl Cannot Help It. Military divers prepare for a mission in 1915, wearing heavy waterproof suits designed for work in freezing conditions. Their primitive equipment offered little protection, making every operation dangerously unpredictable. This 1941 photograph, titled "The Final Dive," captures a burning German Junkers Ju-88 plunging toward the ground. Photographer Vasily Arkashev recorded the final seconds of one of Nazi Germany's most versatile bombers, used for bombing, reconnaissance, and night fighting. In Chelyabinsk in 1996, residents crowded around a van, handing out free samples of a new bread. The desperate rush reflected a harsh era when unpaid wages and rising food prices left millions of Russians struggling. In 1862, Union soldiers stood outside Price, Birch and Company, a notorious slave-trading prison in Alexandria, Virginia. Before the Civil War, thousands of enslaved people were locked inside and shipped south to be sold. In 1924, workers served lunch to refugee children at the Wunsdorf camp near Berlin. Published in the émigré magazine Our World, this rare photograph captures the daily struggle of families displaced by revolution and civil war. Queen Elizabeth II peers through a viewing window at the underwater aquarium on Green Island on April 27, 1970. The island sits directly on Australia's Great Barrier Reef, giving visitors a rare close view of its marine life. In 1973, Salvador Dali stunned a Paris press conference by appearing with a lifelike model of his own head. The surrealist turned a routine media event into a bizarre living artwork, complete with his famous twisted mustache. German soldiers line a ruined Warsaw Street before the Victory Parade on October 5, 1939. Adolf Hitler reviewed the troops that day as Poland entered years of brutal occupation. The Noonan family of 15 lived in Lawrence, Massachusetts during the 1920s. Raising 13 children in a crowded textile city meant that food, clothing, and household work had to be carefully shared every day. Hideki Tojo was convicted of war crimes by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. On December 23, 1948, he was hanged alongside 6 other Japanese leaders. A Japanese-American family stands outside a wooden barrack during the Second World War. More than 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were forced into United States detention camps, and most had never been charged with any crime. Ralph Crane photographed an illegal currency exchange in East Berlin in 1953. Black market dealers offered far better rates than official exchange offices, but anyone caught risked arrest by the East German police. Actress Belle Bilton appears as Belle in an 1889 stage production of Beauty and the Beast. She later became Lady Clancarty after surviving a scandalous divorce case that exposed the private lives of British aristocrats. The Japanese aircraft carrier Soryu is being fitted out at Kure in early 1937, months before entering service. 5 years later, American dive bombers struck her at the Battle of Midway, igniting fuel and armed aircraft before she was abandoned and sunk. The Soviet Union built this concrete and steel sarcophagus over Chernobyl Reactor 4 in just 206 days after the 1986 explosion. It sealed the shattered reactor and its deadly radioactive remains inside, while thousands of workers faced extreme radiation to complete it. On March 30, 1951, a tank from the 25th Infantry Division blasted a deeply buried enemy pillbox with fire near Korea's Han River. The flamethrower was designed to drive soldiers from fortified positions that ordinary gunfire could not easily destroy. Firefighters carry a victim from the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York City on March 25, 1911. The locked exits and poor safety measures helped trap workers inside, leaving 146 people dead in one of America's deadliest workplace disasters. In 1914, European soldiers crafted fake heads to draw enemy sniper fire without risking a real life. By tracking the bullet holes, they could estimate the sniper's position and prepare a deadly counterattack. In 1901, scientists excavated the Berezovka mammoth from frozen ground near Srednyekolimsk, with skin, hair, and flesh still preserved. Undigested plants were found in its mouth and stomach, revealing what it ate shortly before death. On May 4, 1922, a photographer captured a tornado twisting behind the Texas state capitol in Austin. It was one of 2 tornadoes that struck the city that day, killing at least 12 people and injuring dozens. This Croatian woman displays sikanji, traditional Catholic tattoos worn by Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina during Ottoman rule. Crosses and sun symbols were tattooed on children to mark their faith and resist forced conversion. On January 28, 1922, heavy snow collapsed the Knickerbocker Theater roof during a silent film in Washington. The falling roof crushed the balcony and killed 98 people, making it one of the deadliest disasters in the city's history. Members of the Hitler Youth burned books in Salzburg on April 30, 1938, just weeks after Nazi Germany annexed Austria. The flames destroyed works by Jewish, pacifist, and anti-Nazi writers whose ideas the regime feared. In 1898, the Andrei Pilstrom aerostat flew over the Russian Empire with a pilot suspended beneath its enormous gas-filled balloon. Its winged frame was an early attempt to give a balloon-controlled forward flight decades before modern airships became common. This Budapest apartment block was a rebel stronghold during the Hungarian uprising of 1956. Soviet tanks and artillery crushed the resistance, leaving the building split open and thousands of Hungarians dead. James Butler Hickok was only 21 when this photograph was taken in 1858, years before he became the feared gunfighter Wild Bill. He later worked as a scout, gambler, and lawman before being shot dead during a poker game. These Jewish children fled Yemen and arrived at the Beit Lid transit camp in Israel in 1950. They lived in tents while their families faced food shortages, harsh weather, and the difficult task of building new lives in a new country. A Russian conscript studies his reflection in a mud-streaked mirror during the First Chechen War in 1994. Boris Kudryavov's photograph captures a brief moment of self-recognition before the soldier returns to a conflict that would kill thousands. In 1945, Grace Toya posed with her bicycle at Tule Lake, where the United States imprisoned Japanese Americans during World War II. The camp later became a high-security segregation center for those labeled disloyal after a deeply controversial government questionnaire. United States Marines returned fire during the Battle of Hue in 1968, one of the fiercest clashes of the Vietnam War. The fight lasted 26 days as Marines battled street by street to retake the ancient city during the Tet Offensive. In London in 1901, Adelaide Springett was so ashamed of her worn-out boots that she removed them before Horace Warner photographed her. Her bare feet made this portrait one of the most striking records of child poverty in Edwardian London. In the Warsaw Ghetto, starvation and disease killed so many people that bodies were often left in the streets before collection. Some victims collapsed while still alive, but the claim that they were routinely buried under piles of bodies and crushed to death is not supported by reliable evidence. Modern cancer chemotherapy began with mustard gas, a chemical weapon first used by Germany in World War I. Doctors found that it destroyed white blood cells, leading scientists to turn a deadly poison into a treatment for lymphoma. 2 men sit on the wreckage of a bomber at Hickam Airfield after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The destroyed aircraft was buried under rubble and sandbags, turning its remains into part of a defensive position. In Reims, France, in 1917, a little girl played with her doll beside soldiers' rifles and heavy packs. The striking scene shows how children continued ordinary life while the First World War surrounded their city. In 1989, South Korean student activist Lim Soo-kyung danced with North Korean students during an illegal visit to Pyongyang. She returned home by walking across the heavily guarded border at Panmunjom, where she was immediately arrested and later sentenced to 10 years in prison. In 1979, a teacher taught Hebrew to Ethiopian Jews in a classroom with cracked mud walls. Many belonged to the ancient Beta Israel community, which remained largely isolated from other Jewish communities for centuries. This young girl worked as a spinner at Century Cotton Mills in South Boston, Virginia, in June 1911. Her 10-year-old sister, standing beside her, cared for the baby while child labor kept entire families tied to dangerous mill work. A Russian soldier walks through the ruins of Grozny during the First Chechen War between 1994 and 1996. The city became the scene of brutal urban combat, where armored columns were trapped and destroyed in narrow streets. On October 8, 1965, a furious crowd destroyed the Indonesian Communist Party headquarters in Jakarta after 6 army generals were kidnapped and killed. A banner in the ruins demanded death for those blamed as Indonesia entered one of its deadliest political purges. A young French resistance fighter poses with a Sten gun and a bandaged hand in 1944. Britain dropped thousands of these cheap, simple weapons into occupied France, where resistance groups used them in ambushes and sabotage missions. This photograph captures Donald Campbell racing Bluebird at nearly 300 miles per hour on Coniston Water. Seconds later, the boat flipped and disintegrated, killing the only person to set world land and water speed records in the same year. This is Camp Century, the secret American base built under Greenland's ice as a test site for Project Iceworm. The plan was to hide 600 nuclear missiles across thousands of miles of tunnels, making them nearly impossible for a Soviet strike to destroy at once. These women were Margaritas, members of the female Carlist movement, preparing for a military parade in San Sebastian in 1936. Beyond marching, they served as nurses, messengers, and organizers during the Spanish Civil War. On June 16, 1963, Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in space aboard Vostok 6. This grainy image shows her during the 5th orbit of a mission that circled Earth 48 times. This is Mount Vesuvius during its last eruption in March 1944, while Allied forces were fighting nearby. Lava destroyed several villages, killed 26 people, and forced about 12,000 residents to flee. In 1940, these children lived in a California labor camp near Weed Patch, where their family paid $2.75 in rent plus electricity. Their faces appeared through a broken wooden door in one of America's richest farming regions. At midnight in 1906, photographer Lewis Hine captured homeless men waiting for free bread outside New York's Bowery Mission. His photographs exposed urban poverty to the public, years before his famous work helped drive laws against child labor. From 1902, this man tracked every job, town, salary, and girl he dated, starting as a student earning $2 a day. By 1928, he earned $200 a month, owned a home, and had recorded 18 girlfriends before marriage. Stonehenge once stood in full view of passing traffic, making the ancient monument look strangely trapped between modern roads. The nearby road was closed in 2013, allowing the landscape around the 5,000-year-old stones to be partially restored. 2 German soldiers comfort a crying child during the invasion of Poland in 1939. The unsettling photograph captures a brief act of kindness inside a campaign that killed civilians and began the Second World War. A Republican Polikarpov, veteran 15 fighter, lies wrecked during the Spanish Civil War, with Mickey Mouse still waving from its tail. Spanish pilots called this Soviet biplane Chato, meaning snub-nosed, and used it against German and Italian aircraft supporting Franco. Inside Moscow's ZIL factory in 1972, an operator managed calls through a massive control console. This system helped coordinate one of the Soviet Union's largest vehicle plants, which employed tens of thousands of workers. At Moscow's military parade on November 7, 1964, the Soviet Union rolled a submarine through Red Square in front of Lenin's portrait. The enormous display was actually a land-mounted model, built to impress foreign observers with Soviet naval power. In the 1890s, students at the Cumberland Valley State Normal School staged a wild pillow fight for this glass negative. The rare image shows young women breaking strict Victorian rules inside a school that trained future teachers. On February 24, 1942, Los Angeles erupted in panic after radar crews falsely reported enemy aircraft approaching the city. Anti-aircraft guns fired more than 1,400 shells at an empty sky, and the mysterious target was never identified. Hiroshima, before and after the atomic bombing on August 6, 1945. The blast destroyed nearly everything within 2 kilometers of the center, while the death toll reached about 140,000 by the end of the year. In the 1950s, many hospitals sold cigarettes to patients, even though smoking was already linked to lung cancer. Some nurses also lit cigarettes for bedridden patients, turning hospital rooms into places where smoking was treated as normal. On February 18, 1926, Sylvia Donaldson became the first woman to preside over the Massachusetts House as acting Speaker. Women packed the galleries and spilled onto the chamber floor to witness the historic session. This German Messerschmitt ME-410 was photographed moments after Lieutenant Richard Stearns shot it down on November 5, 1943, as its crew jettisoned the canopy to escape. Stearns scored 3.5 victories before he was shot down and captured 5 months later. This shack stood in a Hooverville during the Great Depression, when homeless Americans built entire settlements from scrap wood, metal, and advertising signs. The camps were named to mock President Herbert Hoover, whom many blamed as millions lost their jobs, savings, and homes. In 1872, an 83.5-carat diamond triggered a rush to South Africa's Kimberley mine. Fortune hunters filed 800 land claims, turning the site into a chaotic maze of deep pits, ropes, and fragile wooden platforms. In 1947, police found Ukrainian prisoner of war Vasily Rambovsky hiding in a Norwegian barn, starving and dressed in rags. He had escaped a German camp in 1944 and survived alone in the freezing forests, unaware that the war had already ended. Hopi girls from Shongwapavi were photographed by Charles C. Pierce in the early 1900s. Their huge squash blossom hairstyles showed that they were unmarried and old enough for courtship, turning hair into a clear public sign of social status. In February 1958, Pennsylvania railroad crews battled massive snowdrifts near Winterset, Pennsylvania, after a severe storm buried the mountain tracks. The snow packed the rail cut so deeply that several diesel locomotives were trapped almost to their roofs. In 1962, a car carrying 3 young people plunged down a 25-foot embankment into the Los Angeles River and was swept 2 miles downstream. Trapped inside the moving car, all 3 escaped through the windows and swam to safety. Marilyn Monroe laughs beside her husband, playwright Arthur Miller, at the April in Paris Ball in New York in 1957. The glamorous celebration took place at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel just 1 year after their marriage. This police file from 1912 shows Mordko Blinchikov, a suspected member of the Jewish Socialist Bund, photographed by the Vitebsk Detective Department. The Bund operated underground across the Russian Empire, organizing workers and resisting the Tsarist regime. In 1933, The old Grimsel Hospice stood partly submerged as Switzerland's new dam created Lake Grimsel. The historic hotel was sacrificed to the reservoir, then rebuilt safely higher on the mountainside. In 1954, the United States Army placed mannequins inside furnished homes near a nuclear test site to measure the effects of an atomic blast. Their clothes, furniture, and positions helped researchers study how heat, shock waves, and flying debris could injure real people. In 1943, a pregnant Lucy Obrock tricked the Gestapo, then led an armed ambush that freed her husband Raymond and 13 other prisoners. 6 guards were killed in the attack, and Lucy and Raymond remained married until her death in 2007. In 1983, Vladimir Putin and his future wife, Ludmila Shkrebneva, visited the Soviet War Memorial in Berlin shortly before their wedding. Opened in 1949, the Treptow Park Memorial honors 7,000 Soviet soldiers killed in the Battle of Berlin. Uzbek women gather in Old Tashkent after a conference on their rights on March 8, 1924. 3 years later, the Soviet Hujum campaign urged women to remove their veils, but the backlash was deadly, with hundreds reportedly murdered for defying the tradition. On June 11, 1947, Japanese officer Kiyoshi Matsumoto was led through a huge crowd in Nanjing to face execution for war crimes. Nicknamed the Mountain Tiger, he was convicted of torturing and killing Chinese civilians, hostages, and prisoners of war. On September 8, 1900, winds reaching 214 kilometers per hour hurled these railroad cars across Galveston, Texas. The hurricane killed an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 people and remains the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. For centuries, women in Lima wore the saya and manto, covering everything except one eye, their hands, and ankles. This disguise hid their identity and social class, allowing the famous tapadas limeñas to move freely, flirt, and speak with unusual independence. In the early 1900s, this circus acrobat balanced an entire performer using only a metal mouthpiece gripped between his teeth. These dangerous iron jaw acts demanded extraordinary neck strength, precise balance, and no room for error. On July 4, 1970, France detonated a 914-kiloton hydrogen bomb beneath a balloon 550 meters above Mururoa Atoll. Defense Minister Michel Debré watched from the warship de Grasse, just 48 kilometers away, as the blast formed this massive mushroom cloud over the Pacific. American B-24 Liberator bombers strike Bratislava's synthetic fuel plant in January 1945. The refinery was a vital German fuel source, making it a major target during the final months of the war. New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia smashes confiscated gambling machines with a sledgehammer in 1934. He claimed the mafia-controlled devices stole children's lunch money, and thousands were later destroyed or dumped into the city's rivers. During Operation Frequent Wind in April 1975, American ships rescued 5,595 South Vietnamese refugees as Saigon fell. Their decks became so crowded that sailors pushed 46 helicopters into the sea to clear space for more families fleeing the city. In 1944, Captain Peter Kieskin trained Hitler Youth boys in Frankfurt under Oder to fire the Panzerfaust 60. The 5 badges on his sleeve marked 5 armored vehicles he had personally destroyed with the German 106th Infantry Division. German soldiers grin as they publicly humiliate an elderly Jewish man in Kremenets, Soviet Ukraine, in 1941. The town's Jewish population was later imprisoned in a ghetto, and thousands were murdered during its liquidation in 1942. United States Marines used flamethrowers to clear Japanese bunkers during the Battle of Iwo Jima in February and March of 1945. Around 21,000 Japanese troops defended a hidden network of tunnels, turning the tiny island into one of the Pacific War's deadliest battlefields. This 1932 photograph shows a whale market in Tórshavn, the capital of the Faroe Islands. The carcasses came from a traditional pilot whale hunt, in which entire pods were driven into shallow water and killed. In 1877, Cleopatra's Needle crossed the sea inside this iron cylinder, which was abandoned during a storm after 6 rescuers died. It survived 60 days alone, was recovered, and finally erected beside the River Thames in 1878. On March 13, 1976, President Gerald Ford received a bicentennial rifle in Millers Creek, North Carolina. The man presenting it was a descendant of legendary frontiersman Daniel Boone. In 1920, Sisters Lois and Ruth Waddell ate a staggering 204 oysters between them. Their enormous meal made them the winners of New Orleans' Great Oyster Eating Contest in Louisiana. SS General Jürgen Stroop documented the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto in a leather-bound report filled with photographs of his own crimes. The report became key evidence against him, and in 1952, Poland executed him in Warsaw. On April 8, 1940, HMS Glowworm charged the far larger German cruiser Admiral Hipper, fired torpedoes, and rammed its hull before sinking. This photograph shows survivors clinging to the wreck as the Germans rescued them, while Captain Gerard Roop disappeared beneath the freezing sea. On the night of March 18, 1945, 7 German frogmen tried to destroy Allied bridges across the Rhine, but steel nets, floating barriers, and powerful searchlights mounted on M3 tanks exposed them. 2 froze to death, 2 were shot, and 3 were captured, including the diver shown here near Remagen. On June 20, 1971, Belgian driver Jackie Ickx prepares inside his Ferrari before the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. In heavy rain, he mastered the dangerous track and won the race. 7 crewmen died when a United States Navy Martin PBM patrol bomber lost altitude moments after leaving Naval Air Station Norfolk. It crashed into Willoughby Bay, Virginia on February 17, 1943, leaving its tail standing almost vertically above the water. Danish resistance fighters arrest 2 German soldiers in Copenhagen during the final days of the occupation in 1945. After years of secret sabotage and intelligence work, resistance members emerged openly as Nazi control collapsed and Denmark was liberated. This terrifying image is often mistaken for a German air attack on a Volga crossing during the Battle of Stalingrad. In fact, it was staged among the ruined city for the 1949 Soviet film The Battle of Stalingrad. This battered Ilyushin IL-2 appears to be limping home after a brutal mission in 1943. But the shocking truth is that this famous image is not a wartime photograph at all, but a screenshot from the video game IL-2 Sturmovik, Battle of Stalingrad. 2 North Korean soldiers beg for their lives in Pyongyang on October 21, 1950. One holds a hand-drawn South Korean flag, hoping the enemy symbol will prove their surrender and save them. At the Czech Bodybuilding Championship in Hradec Králové in 1996, a female competitor flexes backstage as 2 men watch closely. Czech photographer Dana Kindrova captured the tense seconds before the athlete stepped into the spotlight. In 1961, Brest fortress defender Vladimir Fursov returned to its ruins 20 years after the brutal Nazi siege. Walking with a crutch, he had survived the battle and later became a biology professor at Kazakh State University in Alma-Ata. In 1972, Irish children sprayed water at armed British soldiers during street unrest in Belfast. Photographer Philip Jones Griffiths captured this strange clash between childhood play and the violence of the Troubles. In 1931, women accused of petty theft were packed behind the bars of an American police station known as the Monkey House. During the Great Depression, stealing food or basic goods could put desperate people in cells like this. In 1941, Marine Lieutenant Walter Osipov was accidentally ripped from a transport plane and dragged behind it for 33 minutes, hanging 300 meters above the ground. Pilot William Lowry flew alongside, while John McCants grabbed Osipov, and their propeller finally cut the tangled parachute lines saving his life. In 1897, Salomon André, Niels Strindberg, and Knut Frenkel launched the balloon Eagle from Spitsbergen, hoping to cross the North Pole. Almost immediately, the gondola struck the water, 3 steering ropes snapped, and the balloon became nearly impossible to control. This photo is often claimed to show one Scottish battalion before and after battle in 1914. In fact, the 2 images show different military formations at Edinburgh Castle, and the shocking story that only 28 men returned has never been verified. A Soviet medic bandages a wounded comrade among the ruins of Stalingrad in 1942. Frontline medics treated soldiers under fire and often dragged them from the battlefield without enough medicine, clean water, or shelter. American Marines take cover under intense fire at the foot of Mount Suribachi during the invasion of Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. 4 days later, Marines captured the summit and raised the flag in one of history's most famous wartime photographs, a traditional Jewish wedding in Tbilisi, Georgia, in 1968. Several men hold a prayer shawl above the couple, forming a wedding canopy that symbolizes the home they will build together. Young Tamil Tiger rebels patrol Batticaloa, Sri Lanka, in 1989, carrying assault rifles during a civil war that lasted 26 years. The group fought for an independent Tamil state and pioneered suicide bombings before government forces defeated it in 2009. In 1944, Andreas Feininger photographed Long Beach, California, packed with oil towers. The drilling frenzy began after oil was discovered at nearby Signal Hill in 1921, turning the area into one of America's richest oil fields. In 1987, a massive line stretched across Red Square as visitors waited to enter Lenin's mausoleum. Inside, they saw Lenin's embalmed body, which had been displayed there since 1924. Launched in 1963, Altai was the Soviet Union's first automatic mobile phone system, with bulky radios installed inside cars. Doctors, officials, emergency crews, and security services could make calls while driving, decades before mobile phones became common. In January 1915, artillery observers watched the snow-covered battlefield in Russian Poland through powerful telescopes. Their reports helped gun crews correct their aim, turning distant movements and shell bursts into precise firing coordinates. At the 1937 Paris World Exposition, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union built rival pavilions directly facing each other. Germany crowned its tower with an eagle and swastika, while the Soviet pavilion displayed the massive worker and collective farm woman statue. In 1938, a young woman walked her dog along Bombay Beach beside California's Salton Sea. The lake had formed only 33 years earlier after a canal failure flooded the desert for nearly 2 years. 2 Chinese soldiers guard the Langsun Provincial Government Building on March 4, 1979. China captured the city during its brief war with Vietnam, then withdrew its forces just weeks later. In 1953, the United States and Britain helped overthrow Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he nationalized Iran's oil industry. Operation Ajax restored the Shah's power and fueled anti-Western anger that helped ignite the Iranian Revolution 26 years later. American socialite Barbara Daly Bakeland hired prostitutes to turn her gay son straight and allegedly began a sexual relationship with him when that failed. In 1972, Anthony stabbed her to death with a kitchen knife in their London home. On July 30, 1943, the American B-17 Tondelayo survived 11 direct hits from German cannon shells over central Germany. None exploded, and one empty shell reportedly contained a check note saying, "This is all we can do for you now." This is Nazi concentration camp Dr. Hans Eisele, who escaped to Egypt after the war. Mossad later sent him a parcel bomb, but it exploded too early, killed a postal worker, and left Eisele completely unharmed. In 1952, Maori children watched authorities burn their demolished homes at Okahu Bay, the last settlement of Ngati Watua Orake. The government had seized the land, declared the village a slum, and left the tribe virtually landless. Miriam Sulakiotis ran a Greek monastery where followers were pressured to surrender their property, then imprisoned, starved, and tortured. When police raided it in 1950, they uncovered enormous hidden wealth and linked the so-called serial killer nun to as many as 177 deaths. Producer George Pal poses with the original Martian puppet from the 1953 film The War of the Worlds. Its three-part eye was designed to resemble the red, green, and blue lenses of a Technicolor camera. These weapons were linked to Abraham Lincoln's assassination and Major Henry Rathbone's stabbing, and the bullet was removed from Lincoln's skull. John Wilkes Booth wore these boots on the night of the murder, while the other weapons were seized from his conspirators. Dark fungi have been found growing on the walls of the destroyed Chernobyl reactor, where radiation levels can kill humans. Their melanin appears to capture ionizing radiation and convert it into energy that helps them grow. Write your opinion in the comments. I will be glad to read it.